Alright, hello everyone, it's Happy, and today we're going to be talking about the top 5 more or less worst tier 10 tanks, or in other words, the top 5 hardest to play tanks at tier 10. Now, remember, just like my previous videos, this is not me just, giving out my opinion. I looked at some numbers and I looked at some stats, and these are the top 5 tanks I came up with that are pretty much the hardest to play for the average player. And so if your favorite tank is in this list, don't get too upset because, again, it's not based on my opinion. And at number 5, we basically have the Batchat. Now, the Batchat is, of course, a tier 10 French light tank. And I don't know what's really wrong with the Batchat. It's more that it's more or less power crept by other tanks. For example, if you compare the Batchat to the Progetto or the TVP, then it doesn't seem as strong anymore. It has a 310 alpha with a 2.8 second interclip with 3 shells in the mag. So it's got a pretty decent drum, but I wouldn't say it's anywhere near to the drum of the TVP or to the auto reloading capability of the Progetto. The weapon handling is pretty decent on this tank actually, but then again, it also has very, very, very good speed. The main thing about this tank and all the other tanks in this list are the fact that these tanks don't necessarily have a lot of armor, and that's why these tanks are going to struggle against many tanks in the game. That's going to be the nature of it, because the average player, as I've said many times, will rely a lot on armor. It doesn't necessarily mean that these tanks are bad in any shape or form. Now, the Batchat's main problem is definitely the fact that it's a light tank. It can't necessarily compete with medium tanks because the DPM is very, very low. And of course, the HP on this thing is quite abysmal, so it can't go against a lot of heavies either. It does have its role, but in my opinion, it's been power crept, and the Batchat is not a very strong tank in general. At number 4, we're going to be placing the FV215B. This is, of course, a British tier 10 heavy tank. Now, this thing has very, very, very good DPM for a heavy tank at almost 3,300. Very, very good weapon handling for, again, a heavy tank. It's got some superb aim time, like one of the best in its tier for a heavy tank. And of course, it's got them HESH shells. So the HESH shells do, a lot of damage, 515 to be precise. And they have 170 millimeters of penetration. So with that, you're absolutely going to be destroying a lot of enemies. And that's pretty much it for the FV215B. You only have a great gun with great weapon handling, great DPM, and you have HESH shells. And that is where the tank ends. The mobility is not amazing for the armor it has, 34 kilometers forward, and the armor is non-existent. Maybe with a turret you'll be able to tank a shot here and there, but the hull is so big, it's unarmored, you will burn, you will die, it's just horrendous. And so this tank, again, is not meant for the average player. If you're very, very, very good and you're a super unicum, maybe you'll be able to pull this tank off. A lot of times, I don't really pull this tank off either. But if you're an average player, I can see why your stats wouldn't be amazing in this tank. It has no armor, it has no mobility, and will the average player really be able to use the HESH shells every time effectively? I don't really think so. So that's why it's probably in this list, because against any other heavy tank, this tank will probably lose because the players don't know how to use it effectively. At number 3, we have the M48 Patton. Now, this tank has been buffed, but I still feel like this tank is not that amazing. The DPM is 3,500 and has some pretty good weapon handling, right? But the mobility really limits this tank a lot. It only has 48 kilometers forward. Now, for a medium tank that doesn't have any armor, that's really, really, really slow. Some heavy tanks are going to be faster than you. Just think about it. You're a medium tank with no armor, as I said again, and you're slower than a lot of heavy tanks. Not a lot, a few to be fair, but it's just very, very slow, and you can't compete with light tanks or mediums. Sure, your DPM is buffed up, your weapon handling is good, but then again, to be a pretty decent tank, you need to have a good armor and a good gun, or good mobility and good armor, or, a combination of two things, not just one thing. So if a tank like the FE215B only has one good thing, just like the M48 Patton, which is the gun, you're not getting a good tank. You need two things that are very, very good in order for a tank to be considered decent. All right. So in this case, I understand why the M48 Patton is in this list, because it really only has a gun, it has no armor, and it has no mobility whatsoever. So therefore, I feel like this tank really deserves one of those spots as, one of the worst tanks in Blitz. At number 2, we have the FV4202. Now, this is a British tier 10 medium tank. And then again, it has a very, very similar problem to other tanks. It does not have any armor. The DPM is 3,300, well, close to 3,300. And similarly, this tank has HESH shells. And there, the penetration is 105, right? So again, what are you going to be doing with... Oh, sorry, not 105. The penetration there is 210, excuse me. It's 210 for the HESH shells with the FV4202. And then you have over 4,000 DPM. But then again, the question arises, will you be able to use that DPM effectively? Probably not, because will you be able to penetrate every single HESH shell? Probably not, because the average player, especially if you're playing on mobile, is not really going to be able to, aim that well and hit every single shot precisely. That's just not going to happen, and therefore it's just not a consistent tank. The tank is riddled with inconsistencies. Sure, the mobility is decent at 60 kilometers forward. The weapon handling is pretty mediocre for a medium tank, to be fair. And the gun itself is fun to play for sure. It's a fun tank to play, but I just feel like it's not consistent enough, and that's the main reason as to why this tank is in the list. It's just not consistent enough at doing that 4,100 DPM. So at number 1, we have the Leopard. Now, again, I don't necessarily think the Leopard is a bad tank. This tank is an absolute beast, and a lot of players really, really like this tank. It's just that the average player who starts playing Blitz sees a Leopard, he's like, oh, a Leopard, it must be amazing. And they get it as their first tier 10 tank, and of course they're going to be completely garbage at it. It makes 100% sense. The Leopard is a very, very, very hard tank to play, simply again because it does not have any armor whatsoever. The sides can be HE'd so easily, the rear can be HE'd so easily. This is not a tank to get as your first tier 10 tank. It should not be happening, but players still do it, and therefore the stats on the Leopard are probably one of the worst at tier 10, just because of the fact that all these players get this tank, but they don't necessarily know how to play it, and therefore the win rate on the Leopard goes down by a lot overall from the worldwide stats. So what does this tank have? This tank has superb DPM, 3,771. Basically, with adrenaline, you're going to be shredding tanks to bits. Amazing weapon handling. The weapon handling is very, very good, and you have 65 kilometers forward. So this tank has very good mobility and an insane gun. So this should be making the Leopard a good tank. And it is a good tank, by far. It's probably the best tank out of this list. However, it's still considered the worst in regards to stats, just because players cannot play it that well. So my advice to you would be to get the Leopard later on when you actually learn how to play the more armored medium tanks. For example, if you can play the E50M well, you can probably start playing the Leopard well. If you can't do well in an E50M, then don't even look towards the Leopard, because it's just going to be very, very, very hard for you. So with that, this list comes to an end. Tell me what you guys think about this in the comment section below. And with that, happy is out, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.